What is going on, everybody? Welcome in to the reveal of the number 27 team in my power rankings heading into next season and the next episode of our off-season deep dive series. Today, taking a look at the 2024 New York Giants, a team trying to get some of that 2022 magic back after last year was just a complete disaster of a season. So it's going to be a fun one to talk about if they maybe can get some of that magic back or if this thing's truly heading in the wrong direction and there is no hope. Before we do get started, if you could take just a second to hit that like button, it really helps me out. Also, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of these deep dives as we lead up to the number one team in my power rankings. Also, make sure you stick around to the end of the video. We have an amazing guest joining us for the show today, Bengal, here to represent his Giants. An interview you're not going to want to miss there. Also, just want to give you a heads up. My wife and I are headed to Europe for a little summer vacation here, so it's going to be about a 2-week hiatus until the next deep dive. So you guys get some time to catch up on any of the episodes you've missed so far in the series. But without further ado, let's get started. As always, taking a look at this team's offseason, where they got better, where they got worse, and this was a very busy offseason for the New York Giants, starting with some coaching movement, though not a full overhaul of the coaching staff, but the defensive coordinator, Wink Martindale, who certainly had a falling out here in New York, and they let him go to bring in Shane Bowen, who's been the coordinator under Mike Vrabel in Tennessee. His first crack at being a defensive coordinator by himself. So I suppose to be determined in terms of if he can be an upgrade over Wink Martindale, who I don't think was terrible, if not polarizing here in New York. But I do think the coaching staff overall is upgraded as they brought in my opinion, one of the 3 to 5 best offensive line coaches in the NFL in Carmen Bricillo, who's done a phenomenal job with the Raiders offensive line and letting Bobby Johnson go, who witnessed this offensive line basically rewrite the definition of failing to meet expectations, if that makes sense. This group was nowhere near as good as they could have been last year. So they're hoping that can set some things in the right direction in terms of being able to actually block guys this year, which was a big problem for this team last year. So I do think coaching staff is upgraded, if not for the defensive coordinator spot, which could be better, but certainly for the O-line changes. But then with the players, quarterback is slightly upgraded just in the sense that they get their starting quarterback back. Daniel Jones missed the second half of last season. And look, even the biggest Daniel Jones haters, it's hard to make a case that he's worse than Tyrod Taylor and Tommy DeVito. So, Jones only played 30% of the team's snaps last year. They're hoping that's closer to 100% this year. Still has to come back healthy off of the ACL, and then they also add Drew Lock. So I'm going to say slightly upgraded with the quarterback room, and if they can get 2022 Daniel Jones back, that would be a huge upgrade. But obviously downgraded with the running back room. They say goodbye to Saquon Barkley, unwilling to really give him that massive contract, and they get rewarded by him going to the division rival Eagles. They also are letting the veteran Matt Breida out the door, and fairly minimal work to replace those guys. Devin Singletary, a decent enough signing. We'll talk about him later on, but he's not Saquon Barkley. And then 5th round pick Tyrone Tracy out of Purdue. Also downgraded with the tight end room as newfound auto-tune rapper Darren Waller is apparently going to go start his music career and not play for the Giants after they traded a 3rd-round pick for him last year. Played about half their snaps last year. They're looking to replace him with Daniel Bellinger stepping up, but a handful of different bodies as well to come in and compete. Theo Johnson, the RAS score god from this pre-draft process in the 4th round. My guy, Jack Stoll from Philadelphia, and the journeyman blocking tight end, Chris Manhertz. But definitely downgraded, even though Darren Waller only played half this team's snaps last year. He was actually pretty good when he did play. But they are hoping the upgrades here in the wide receiver room are going to more than compensate for that loss. At the end of the day, Darren Waller was more of a wide receiver than tight end anyway, but obviously spending that 6th overall pick on Malik Neighbors, a lot of this team's success this season and beyond is going to hinge on him being the true superstar that he is capable of being. And then they do get Isaiah McKenzie to reunite with Brian Daboll to fill out that slot wide receiver room. And then Allen Robinson is still kicking around the NFL. We'll see if he even makes this team. But it is upgraded in the wide receiver room, as they really didn't lose anyone other than Sterling Shepard, who played 80 snaps for them last year. Not even really worth listing. And then on the offensive line, they just, they pulled the plug. They dashboarded this thing. They hit the hard reset. They were like, let's blow this group up. Basically about half of the team's snaps played last year on the offensive line no longer back on the roster. Your motley crew of Ben Bredesen, Mark Glowinski, Justin Pugh, who came off the couch to play, 3/4 of this team's games last year, Tyree Phillips, all out. And then they hopefully added a couple starting caliber guys in John Runyon from the Packers to play right guard, Jermaine Illuminor, a guard tackle hybrid from the Raiders, following Carmen Brasillo over, the offensive line coach, and then about 6 other names. No room on the graphic for these guys, but Yadni Kajust, Austin Schlottman, Aaron Stiney, Jimmy Morrissey, Matt Nelson, Joshua Miles. There's a huge list of guys. They're like, we saw what our depth looked like last year. We want nothing to do with that, and I can't really blame them for that. So, upgrade it. It's gonna be very difficult for this group to not be upgraded from what it was last year, which was horrible. Then you look at the defensive side of the ball, a little bit less change, but change nonetheless. Downgraded for me on the interior of the defensive line. We've got Ashawn Robinson, was a rotational starter for them, and they're letting him go to Carolina. And then Leonard Williams is worth listing. They traded him near the deadline last year, but comparing this group to last year's team, he did exist for a healthy chunk of the year. So he's no longer with the team, obviously. And all they really did was add Jordan Phillips. Honestly, that's a question mark for me with this offseason. I feel like you should be doing a little bit more to give Sexy Dexy a little bit of help on the inside there. So, if I'm going to sit here and be critical of anything, it's like, man, you should have something else on the interior. And it's not too late to do that. Hopefully, as the offseason goes on, we see another name in that added category for the interior D-line. But obviously, massive upgrades on the edge as they take that second-round pick and flip it for Brian Burns. They might not have given Dexter Lawrence help on the inside, but they certainly did give him a, number 2 running mate that Kayvon Thibodeau just hasn't been able to be for this team. So love that. All they're losing is Jihad Ward, who had to play by necessity for them. He goes where Wink Martindale goes, basically, so he's not back anymore. And then in the linebacker, leaving this as neutral, losing nobody, and just adding some depth pieces, Matthew Adams worked pretty well for this team the last time they signed a Colts linebacker in Bobby Okereke. And then 6th-round pick Darius Masau out of UCLA. Cornerback room is certainly downgraded here. Adoree Jackson, though he didn't play great last year, I do still think has good football in him. It's a tough system to be the number 1 corner in a Wink Martindale defense, and they're going to let him go. And really all they're doing to replace that is drafting Drew Phillips in the 3rd round. I like Drew Phillips, but those are relatively big shoes to fill. And then Aaron Robinson is technically back with this team. 3rd-round pick from 3 years ago has had a hard time staying healthy, but pretty clear downgrades, not just there, but also in the secondary with the safety room. They chose not to pay Xavier McKinney, whose market was really, really big. I mean, Green Bay, desperate for a safety. They pay him like $16 million a year. Honestly, I can't even really blame the Giants for looking at where they are and saying we can't really justify that. But it is going to be downgraded as they let him go and then, spend a 2nd-round pick on Tyler Nubin, Jalen Mills, the veteran kind of corner / safety as well from New England. They're definitely getting younger and cheaper in the secondary. It's an interesting room. I'm excited to talk about it towards the back end of the video. And then special teams slightly upgraded because Graham Gano missed half of this team's season last year. So just by getting him back, slight upgrades there. Certainly an interesting offseason. This is a team that has a bazillion holes, and they actually chose to, let some of those holes expand with like the cornerback room and the safety room specifically, creating questions at running back by letting Saquon go, but recognizing like they're in transition and can't keep all these veterans. But I don't hate everything they did either. They made some exciting moves, especially the Brian Burns move, right? Hopefully spending in the right places for this team. But before we go through the roster, breaking down each group, how they rank against the rest of the league, I want to talk about this coaching staff for the Giants, how they rank against the rest of the league. And look, there's no way to get around this. Brian Daboll and this coaching staff are the core reason why I'm so high on the New York Giants, coming in with the 27th spot in my rankings. I agree with a lot of the people that think the Giants should have been ranked already, in that the Giants do have one of the worst rosters in the league, but I do view Brian Daboll as a coach that can and will elevate this team, as he's frankly done in the first 2 years of his time in New York. The first year, this roster was in significantly worse shape than it is now, and they were a 10-win playoff team that won a playoff game on the road. Was, by my eyes, a unanimous coach of the year, and really proved why he was such a highly touted, basically, recruit in the coaching cycle. And then you get to last year. Expectations are high. I ranked them like 13th, and that was polarizing because it was kind of lower than how they finished the year before, but higher than a lot of people thought based on the roster talent still after that big, surprising 2022 season. And obviously this team sort of regressed back to the mean a little bit more and probably played closer to expectations. But, man, I still can't sit here and say Brian Daboll did a bad job as the head coach last year. I mean, this team was already a lesser roster that was decimated by injuries. Andrew Thomas, the only adequate piece on that offensive line, missed the first 8 weeks of the season. Second he gets back, starting quarterback Daniel Jones goes down for the year. So you're looking at, half the season with either an injured Tyrod Taylor or Tommy DeVito. Remember the whole Tommy Cutlets craze? Got to tip your cap to Tommy DeVito, but Brian Daboll doing a lot of the heavy lifting to create workable looks for the undrafted rookie quarterback that really came out of nowhere. And this team still won 6 games last year when, they had defensive turmoil, they had offensive turmoil, the first half of the season. That's really the biggest question I think you have to ask about Brian Daboll is what the hell happened with the blocking. It got much better in the second half of the year when Andrew Thomas returned, but that, him being gone isn't enough to explain why they were just a, merry-go-round of an offensive line that couldn't block anybody for the first half of the year. That to me is the biggest question you have to ask, and hopefully, with him showing they could repair it in the second half of the year, and bringing in Carmen Brasillo, those will get fixed. You get some better playmakers, you get your quarterback back, and you can kind of get back on track with feeling like this is one of the premium offensive minds in the league. So call me a Brian Daboll apologist. I think the discussion of him being on the hot seat is pretty crazy. He was reason number 73 on a list of why this team struggled offensively last year, in my opinion. Not to mention, he's also taken the play calling back this year from Mike Kafka. That's something a lot of Giants fans, I think, are excited for. I have heard a lot of complaints about Mike Kafka throughout the last couple of years on this channel from Giants fans, so excited to see that. There's some reason to believe that the play calling can get even better here with that change. But yeah, I'm just super optimistic still for who's in charge here. For me, it's much more of a roster talent question with the Giants. So with that, it shouldn't be a huge surprise to see them come in very favorable in terms of the coach rankings here. I have Daboll still ranked in my eyes as the 9th overall head coach in the league. I know that might sound crazy to some, but just laying out the list and in a vacuum, who do I want? Brian Daboll's the 9th guy that I put down on my list. And then very favorable rankings in terms of the pass game coaching, where I've got them ranked 5th to 7th in the NFL with an A- grade for pass game coaching. And just a little bit behind that for run game coaching, 8th to 11th with a B grade. A little bit more on what the scheme looks like for Brian Daboll. he's very much a kind of shotgun, spread them out, modern pro spread style offense. Will run the ball out of the gun, will use gun formations to tap into the quarterback run game, which we've seen with Josh Allen, but he's kind of unlocked a weapon in Daniel Jones with read options and all that kind of stuff. But he's good at mixing things up. It's not just inside zone all the time. They'll get into gap and trap and all of the different pin and pull stuff that you can do out of shotgun. Good at mixing in a jet sweep here and getting creative with the screen game. Like, all of that early down stuff looks really good for Brian Daboll. But probably the thing that stood out the most to me over his time back to Buffalo and even here in New York is how kind of innovative he is to get those deeper looks open in the passing game. Really nifty with, deep crossers and, creating high-low reads that are 15, 20 yards down the field. He'll run basically extended mesh plays, whereas typically mesh is going to be, 2 crossers around the 4 or 5 yard mark. He'll run a deep field mesh with 2 deep crossers that can, take a really proven concept like mesh, but turn it into a more explosive play down the field. That's just one of the things he does. Just really good at kind of setting stuff up, the predictive nature of designing an offense, knowing, how to get a team to switch into single high, but then once you get single high, he'll, hit that slot fade or push the right button to attack you and get an explosive chunk play. So I'm just, again, I know there was some shine lost with what happened last season, but I'm just not ready to believe that Brian Daboll is all of a sudden a bad head coach and should be on the hot seat just because, this team forgot how to block anybody for the first 8 weeks of last season. Beyond that, not really worth mentioning. Mike Kafka, he's here, has less of a role now, supposedly not going to be calling plays, and has been mostly under Brian Daboll for the last, 3 years, basically, since leaving as an assistant for the Andy Reid Chiefs. He's a very young coach, still learning a lot about himself as an offensive coordinator. But let's talk about the defensive side of the ball. This is Shane Bowen's first crack at kind of being the overseer of a defense. He was the defensive coordinator in Tennessee, but that was all under Mike Vrabel, who was obviously going to have his paws on that defense. And you know how it works. So there are going to be questions about, can he run the show, which is why they don't rank terribly high. They actually rank, tied with the lowest ranking teams in the league for pass defense coaching just because of that unproven element. But I do think the run defense coaching was especially, that was something that was very notable in the Mike Vrabel regime, kind of running that Belichickian system, great gap discipline, preaching that high intensity, early down, basically effort defense that Mike Vrabel was so good at inspiring in Tennessee. I think some of that will, kind of permeate through Shane Bowen here, and that's definitely an area that they're hoping will be massively improved for this team because their run defense was really bad last year, and when you have the best nose tackle in the NFL, that just shouldn't be the case. So hopefully that can be an area that adds some more sort of consistency and discipline to this defense. But as far as the scheme, I would anticipate that it's pretty similar to what we saw in Tennessee, which is honestly, to put it simply for Giants fans, it's not terribly dissimilar from a Wink Martindale defense. It's that typical kind of attacking 3-4 mentality with the stand-up edge rushers, the ability to drop those guys into coverage, to get creative with your blitz packages, with some of that coverage dropping ability from the edge rushers. A lot of stunts, a lot of blitzing linebackers. Like, that much is not really going to change with what we had with Wink Martindale. But I think what we just talked about with some of that more disciplined mentality and approach to defense overall, that should shine through and at least raise the floor of this defense. It's yet to be determined if Shane Bowen can be quite as nifty in terms of pressing the right buttons with those blitzes that Wink Martindale is very good at. But, I think it had run its course where Wink wants to live in a world where you can blitz whenever you want. It's just playing aggressive, live by the sword, die by the sword. That can be fun in a 2022 season where, you're in a complete rebuild and you're, trying to have fun, mix things up, see if you can catch teams off guard. When you're trying to build a more sustainable defense over time, going with a coach that is going to preach a little bit more gap discipline, play a little bit more, quarters and cover 3 off zone, a little bit more of that bend don't break style while also still being a little bit aggressive. That's probably healthy for this team in the long run. So it was a sound hire. It's just Bowen's going to have to prove what he can do, kind of now separated from Mike Vrabel. So it is a staff, especially on the offensive side of the ball, that I obviously think very highly of. And when people ask, why have the Giants not been revealed yet? I just point to Brian Daboll and I'm like, it's him. He's been elevating this team for 2 years. We're going to go through this roster. You're going to see some holes, but this is a coach that can elevate lesser players and get guys to develop to fill those holes better than a lot of coaches that we've talked about so far and will continue to talk about. So at least for one more year, I'm going to continue to kind of pound the table for Brian Daboll here, being the right guy for the job, more than the right guy for the job. But let's get into the good stuff. Let's talk about this roster, breaking down each position group, how they stack up and rank against the rest of the league. And that's going to start with the quarterback room. And I saw the feedback. I heard the feedback. We are going to continue separating the quarterback graphic and the weapons graphic. And I even want to step further because some people have been complaining about Jaden Daniels' ranking, not really understanding what I was saying about how we have a passing grade, we have a run grade. The passing grade isn't the full picture for how I view the quarterback. Well, we're going to put it all together in this graphic now. And this is a good quarterback to kind of introduce this sort of format, if you will, because Daniel Jones is a quarterback that is basically elevated by what he brings to the table in the run game. You see that passing grade for me is a 74. When you factor in, honestly, how dynamic he is as a rushing threat for this team when healthy, that overall grade comes up a couple spots to a 76. But it's kind of weird being here in 2024, basically feeling like a Daniel Jones apologist at this point. I think a lot of people are much lower on Daniel Jones than ranking him as the 23rd quarterback in the league. And this is basically ranking all the quarterbacks at their floor. Daniel Jones a little bit more quote unquote proven. There's not a whole lot of room for this ranking to go up, as it will for basically all the quarterbacks we've talked about so far that are rookies and unproven commodities, like a Will Levis. 23rd is close to a best case scenario for Daniel Jones, but it is weird to kind of be a Daniel Jones apologist at this point, to the point where I'm like, I still think he's a solid, starting caliber quarterback in the NFL, getting placed in that adequate starter tier. And while I was super low on him coming out, and really for a couple years before that 2022 season, I was like, they got to find a way out of Daniel Jones. They got to, move on, find another, answer for their future. I think when you look at this right now, the most sort of optimistic way you can go about this is viewing Daniel Jones as a very solid bridge quarterback for this team, assuming he can get back healthy and look like he did in 2022 and kind of live out this contract that has 2 years left on it and essentially be the guy that can survive or coast or whatever term you want to use, but be an adequate piece at the quarterback position, adequate enough that you are able to evaluate the wide receiver room, find out if Malik Neighbors is a legit alpha number one, see if this offensive line can be a good enough unit to, kind of lift up the group. And in the meantime, just kind of let Daniel Jones do his thing. I think if you look at it that way, Daniel Jones is actually a very solid piece for that plan. And I think the Giants themselves know, like, there's going to be a point in time where they want to pounce on that quarterback prospect that they like, but this year was not the year to do that. I don't believe that. If you rip Malik Neighbors off of this team and put in a Drake May or a Jaden Daniels in some aggressive trade up where you're also giving up future draft picks, this would be a situation where you're not going to give that quarterback a fair chance. Well, you spend that high pick on a Neighbors, and hopefully you can have this bridge quarterback here to allow other players to develop. You develop that identity with your team and can eventually move on from Daniel Jones. No one's really going to sit here and say that isn't their plan or shouldn't be their plan. But where I think the hate has gotten a little bit too far in Daniel Jones is this idea that he's just trash and shouldn't be starting in the league. There's a lot of people suggesting that Drew Lock is going to start for this team. We'll talk about Drew Lock, but I'm not there in terms of being that low on Daniel Jones. I still see him as a starting caliber quarterback and even a crop above the sort of Jacoby Brissett, Gardner Minshew, true like bridge quarterbacks. I think Daniel Jones can be a bridge quarterback for this team while also being a crop above a true bridge quarterback, which is in a way a benefit there. I think what he showed you in 2022 is his processing has come along to a very high level, despite not having receivers open all the time or a lot of time to sit in the pocket and pick apart defenses. I think he's developed a lot of that, something we talked about just last episode with Bo Nix and have talked about with Brock Purdy and Jalen Hurts. I think with Dable coming in, I think what he kind of told Daniel Jones was like, all right, we're going to read out, as quick as you can, read out the concept, but don't be afraid to run. If you don't like what you see or you don't trust it, you're athletic, you can pick up tough scrambles and keep the chains moving, and he has shown that he can do that on a lot of tough third downs. He's been a really frustrating scrambler, and then Dable has also really tapped into what he can do in the designed run game as well, opening things up to the best of their ability with read options and that sort of stuff. I think people forget that in 2022, Daniel Jones had 700 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns. That's legit. That's real contributions to the offense that brings value to his team as the quarterback. So I think you get the point. Like, he's not perfect. He doesn't have the strongest arm. He struggles to push the deep ball. He doesn't have a great feel inside the pocket. That's probably the defining trait that you look at him and be like, yeah, he's never going to be a great quarterback. He can't feel the rush. He doesn't naturally manage the pocket. He takes bad sacks. It leads to bad fumbles. There's obvious stuff missing. And when it's ugly with Daniel Jones, it can be quite ugly. But I do see a quarterback that can play within the structure of an offense, not make a ton of mistakes. He's really improved in terms of turnovers, throw with solid accuracy. I think he's flashed the ability to push the ball deep. That's a frustration. That's a point of frustration for him, but getting him Malik Neighbors, you're hoping that can improve. And then add stuff with his feet. And the other thing I have to mention is, I've been talking about how people have written him off as garbage. A lot of recency bias going on there. Like, the last 8 games that we saw of Daniel Jones were horrible. But if you compare the pass protection right around that point where Daniel Jones got hurt, like literally week 9, Andrew Thomas comes back to make some other changes. The pass pro in the second half of the year for Tyrod Taylor and DeVito was not amazing, but astronomically better than what Daniel Jones had to deal with in the first half of the season. And it really was one of those situations where very few, if any, quarterbacks are going to look like anything other than pure garbage when they just don't have even a second to throw the ball at times. So I think it's easy for people to look at the contract and, knowing they don't like Daniel Jones, seeing his production for 8 weeks and be like, yep, he's trash. I was right. I knew it. But there's more to it than that. You watch the film and it's like there's just really nothing to take away from those first 8 games for Daniel Jones. I think it's much more useful to go look at 2022 when things were more practical. And that's where you landed him as the 23rd best quarterback, assuming he can come back from that ACL injury. Coming off the ACL injury week 9. So he's got about 10 plus months to recover there. Doesn't have a history of injuries. So, or at least, significant injuries like that. So theoretically, should be able to get back out there for week 1. And in my opinion, as long as he's available, he will be the week 1 starter. I just don't see this team choosing Drew Lock over Daniel Jones when he has been paid. And I think this team does realize how big of a nightmare he had to play behind with that O-line last year. And at least give the guy that you're paying a chance to play with Malik Neighbors and potentially the best pass protection he's had in his career here. But we do have to talk about Drew Lock, who there's an off chance is the week 1 starter if Daniel Jones isn't quite ready to go off of the ACL injury. And is there a 3% world where with his arm talent and relative athletic ability and, traits that in a Brian Daboll offense, Drew Lock can come out and have that sort of Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield, whatever surprise season? Yeah, I think there's like a 3% chance that happens, but the tape on Drew Lock is just not good. The processing is abysmal, to put it lightly. He's a first-read quarterback. He doesn't throw with anticipation. He needs to see the receiver open before he lets the ball go. He puts the ball in harm's way. He makes bad reads. He makes bad decisions in scramble drill. He's not a unbelievable athlete. I don't think he has like this remarkable transcendent arm. It's stronger than Daniel Jones, but I just don't really believe that Drew Lock is that guy. I think he's a backup with some traits that just was never able to live up to his, kind of draft pedigree. A lot of like Matt Corral types of vibes with Drew Lock, in my opinion. So would I be interested if he's starting week 1? Yeah, but to me, this is more of he's a backup, and if you get to week 12 and Daniel Jones looks really bad and you just kind of want to see what Drew Lock can do as you're gearing up to draft a quarterback in the top 2 or 3 of next year's draft, then you could maybe turn it over to Drew Lock. But I'm certainly not buying into this idea that he's going to take this job and Daniel Jones is not the starter here. That's just my stance on it. And then you got Tommy Cutlets, fun undrafted rookie year. I think, the lack of traits, the lack of arm talent, and he's a good athlete. He can extend plays and stuff, but he's not like this big uber scrambler or mega threat on the design run game. He does definitely look and feel like a backup quarterback, but that doesn't mean what he did last year wasn't really impressive. Came in literally out of nowhere, was, basically a average Big Ten starter at Illinois, but comes in and, looks like a very capable backup. I mean, it's a hell of a career if Tommy DeVito can, for a hometown team here, with the fan, be one of the more fan favorite backup quarterbacks in the league. Be a guy that if your quarterback goes down, he can step in and, rally the team, make a couple throws, extend a couple plays, and maybe win you a game. I like that trajectory for Tommy DeVito. So call me a fan as long as no one's calling him the future of the Giants organization. But despite all the crave, I can't remember a, New York narrative as fun as this since Jeremy Lin. Despite all that, I think Giants fans are very level-headed about who Tommy DeVito is as a quarterback. So for what it's worth, the backup room is one of the better backup rooms in the league. And then Nathan Rourke is also probably going to get practice squatted here. He's already bounced around a little bit from Jacksonville to New England. But let's talk about the weapons here. And it's a low-ranking group. They get a C grade from me, ranking 28th to 30th. But that could skyrocket if Malik Neighbors can prove to be the guy that I think he is. And, we're ranking most of these players in these position groups at their floor. And the reality is for any rookie, you can't just come in and be like, oh, yeah, he's a top 10 elite dynamic wide receiver. But I will tell you, I think Malik Neighbors is the type of wide receiver that can be that within his rookie season, assuming the quarterback play and the play design is good enough and they're funneling the offense through the guy. I think he's unbelievable. I think he can have that Jamar Chase rookie season, that Justin Jefferson rookie season, that Puka Nacua rookie season, where they really do run this offense through this guy. And you look back on this ranking a year later and be like, that was more of a top 15 group of weapons just because of how special Malik Neighbors is. I'm on the record saying he's the highest graded wide receiver I've ever had since I've been ranking players on this channel for 7 years, not named Marvin Harrison Jr. So they get that guy in this draft. A true do-it-all potential alpha wide receiver, can threaten you to all 3 levels. It's like, where do you want to start with him? The route running is sensational, almost underrated with how much we talk about his athleticism and his run after catch ability, some of the spectacular catches he's able to make. But he sets guys up with his feet. He can turn on a dime. He can stop on a dime. All that with his game is phenomenal. We mentioned the run after catch threat where Brian Daboll, I'm really excited to see how he's going to use Malik Neighbors, getting him the ball on sweeps and bubble screens, and even like lining them up in the backfield at times. They get wild with some of that stuff. I think Daboll will experiment with that. I think they'll see what Neighbors did running slot fades at LSU and almost certainly tap into that. It almost hurt me to only rank him as a quote-unquote good starter and a 78 grade because I just think that highly of him. But got to keep things consistent with this series where we're not, giving one team benefit of the doubt or projecting here where we aren't there. All these guys got to come out and prove it. But I love this pick, and I think he is a really transcendent talent that, for a lot of teams we talk about, we need to see the rookie quarterback come in and show what he can do. And all that matters for this team is that, the quarterback is the guy of the future. That's almost Malik Neighbors here for the Giants, where it's like nothing. I can't say nothing else matters for this offense, but the number one priority for this offense is like, is Malik Neighbors as good as we think he can be? And if he is, then you can start talking about, okay, this is a better surrounding cast, certainly than it was last year for a young quarterback to step in. So really excited for him. Beyond that, I think we do see a pretty large rotation of basically adequate weapons. No one I'm overly excited about. The only guy that might have higher upside than what we're listing him at here is Jalen Hyatt. We'll get to him. But I think the primary starters will be Darius Slayton and Wan'Dale Robinson. I actually think Slayton is slightly underrated. I view him as kind of a Marquez Valdez-Scantling type who's a little bit better in the short game, can actually run a slant and make a tough catch. Better after the catch, and doesn't have quite as bad of drop issues as like a Marquez Valdez-Scantling. But in terms of being like in an ideal situation, a starter on the outside as a vertical threat with some good speed and good ball tracking ability in more of a piece in a more prolific offense, I think he could actually be a very capable player. Unfortunately, he's had to be more than that. He's had to run a larger route tree than he's comfortable with. He's had to see a larger target share than you're comfortable with, which can emphasize some of those drops and inability to win contested catches. And he just hasn't had the quarterback play to truly unlock him as a deep threat. Even then, he's still made some good plays and persevered to hold on to this job. Whereas, heading into that 2022 season, it was like he was kind of an afterthought at that point. He's really responded well and turned into, in my opinion, a very solid starter. He actually wants a new contract here for the Giants. I would imagine Darius Slayton himself agrees with a lot of those points I made about him basically not being in the best position for him to succeed, and that he probably looks at that Darnell Mooney contract, which was 3 years, $40 million, and Darius Slayton's like, I'm basically Darnell Mooney, and I agree. They're like very similar players in terms of skill set. And I think the Giants are like, yeah, we're not gonna go there. You haven't produced like that. So there's, a little bit of I don't even know if it's a dispute or anything like that, but I know Darius Slayton wants that money, and I can't really disagree with him for whatever that is worth or is relevant to the conversation. But let's actually mention Jalen Hyatt, because I think he's probably the Giants' out to Darius Slayton. And I guess this makes it a little bit more relevant to bring up the fact that Slayton wants more money, because if they rotate Darius Slayton with Jalen Hyatt a little bit, just as they did last year, these are two very similar kind of, 6 foot, lankier, speedier, deep threat types. If they are to rotate these guys and Jalen Hyatt is stepping up and being a threat down the field, which he showed some flashes of being able to do that last year, Darius Slayton could totally be a nice, like what we saw last year with this team dumping Leonard Williams. Slayton could actually be a really nice, mid-season trade that's like mutually beneficial, where the Giants want to get younger and stay cheap at that position with the deep threat. And then someone can come in and get a missing piece for their group of weapons. I guess you heard it here first, but I do think Slayton's there week one because Hyatt's just rather unproven. Very one-dimensional coming out of that Tennessee offense that basically asked him to run about 4 routes all season, and didn't necessarily show the consistency to be a full-force route runner to consistently handle contact down the field, which was his issue as a 170-pound deep threat. So he's definitely got a little bit more to prove there. You could arguably put an up arrow next to Jalen Hyatt, but I'm just going to be honest, I'm just not that big of a Jalen Hyatt guy. But hopefully I can be wrong about that. But wanted to lump those two guys together because they're similar skill sets and should split or at least eat into each other's reps. And then you have a very similar style of conversation where Wan'Dale Robinson and Isaiah McKenzie are like the same guy. It's funny how full circle this has literally come here because my pro comp on Wan'Dale Robinson coming out was Isaiah McKenzie. I had a 3rd to a 4th round grade on Wan'Dale Robinson, but it made total sense when Brian Daboll drafted him in the 2nd round to be his Isaiah McKenzie. That's a player that has had a role in this offense for all of those gadget touches and the quick hitting stuff that he can scheme open with two-way goes and slants and, speed outs and all the different stuff you can do with a fleet of foot, undersized slot wide receiver like this. So Wan'Dale will have that role. He has produced in that role. He's actually definitely exceeded my own draft grade of him with a 3rd to a 4th round grade. I think I gave this like a D grade in my draft grades video, and I didn't like the pick, but and aspects of that have shown that he's just not a very high upside wide receiver. But for that role in this offense, he's a useful, productive player. As long as he remains your 3rd or 4th option in this group, it's actually totally fine. But he has had a hard time staying healthy, which makes the Isaiah McKenzie signing a good one. And I threw the rotational starter tag on both these guys because I think Brian Daboll just loves Isaiah McKenzie going back to his time in Buffalo and isn't going to be able to help himself, but at least give McKenzie 2 or 3 drives a game as the slot. So those two guys are redundant but useful pieces within this system. And then the other wide receiver I want to mention is Isaiah Hodgins, a guy I like, big-bodied, kind of possession wide receiver, probably ideally best fit as a wide receiver 4 to come in and, eat 10, 15 snaps, be a reliable piece, do some dirty work and some reliable stuff in the short to intermediate game. A better route runner than anybody should be at that size, but he's just not fast and really limited from being a high-end starter. So had to step up as a starter in 2022, but I think filling in as wide receiver depth is a good spot for him, and he will play a decent amount, especially when they want someone out there that'll actually block, because honestly, I look at the 5 guys we just talked about, and none of them are blockers, so he'll have usefulness there, especially without Darren Waller on this team to be that kind of big slot, quasi tight end. I think there's still a lot of work to go around for Hodgins, and he'll still probably be a 35 catch, 400 yard, 4 touchdown receiver that kind of eats into all these guys' workloads. They also signed Allen Robinson. I would keep Hodgins at this point. I just think he's going to work harder and honestly be more reliable at this point for what you're getting there. I don't really understand that signing. We'll see if he makes the team. It was very lackluster for the Steelers last year. But if he takes Hodgins' job, I would pick up Isaiah Hodgins in a heartbeat if I was a lot of other teams that needed a useful player to fill out my depth chart. Going to be tough for anybody else to make the team. The only other guy to kind of keep an eye on there is Bryce Ford Wheaton, who they gave the most money among all undrafted free agents last year. Probably should have been drafted just off of the athletic traits for the wide receiver position. He's got the size and all of the movement skills you look for, but unfortunately tore his ACL in the preseason last year, which was honestly maybe a blessing in disguise for him because it allowed him to basically just stick around, learn the offense, observe. He's got to make this team, but he's definitely a name to keep an eye on if he gets that opportunity. He's just, if he's got the work ethic to develop his game, if that can pair with his traits, you could have something there. So we'll see what he can do. Let's talk about the tight ends. So I do see Daniel Bellinger as the starter. He was in 2022, and for a rookie that year, he was solid. Obviously took a back seat to Darren Waller last year, and it was kind of tough. Waller was in and out of the lineup, the quarterback situation, everything was just a disaster and really not an opportunity for Bellinger to continue to grow because he was a flawed player, hands and route running. He never was really built to start as a rookie. He was kind of that developmental, raw more raw tight end that had to start and did a good job for what he was. So I am interested to see what he is here with that opportunity opening back up. I know the popular take is going to be Theo Johnson to step into that role. And for those that follow my draft analysis, I just really pushed back on basically this idea of Theo Johnson as this great tight end prospect. He tested, one of the best workouts at the combine that we've ever seen for a tight end. But man, when I watched him at Penn State, I just did not see that type of a mover. If you give him 8 steps to build up speed down the seam, he can do that. But he's super clunky, turns like a semi-truck, not as good of a blocker as he should be at his size. I think Bellinger's probably a better blocker. Bellinger came from San Diego State offense, by the way, that was like a run-only offense. That's why he was so raw as a receiving tight end, but he's got the traits to be a starting tight end in the league, and he's blocked pretty well, especially for a young, rookie tight end. So I think he's going to definitely take that job just from a blocking perspective, let alone the fact that I think he's a better athlete and a more proven receiver. Theo Johnson kind of came in with that tag of great athlete, but underutilized in the receiving game. College just didn't know how to use him, and I think they weren't using him for a reason. He didn't get open. The one area that was impressive with Theo Johnson, not to just dunk on the guy, is, he's got a great vertical jump. He can elevate and come down with some really tough catches in the red zone. I think Theo Johnson can be a really good tight end too someday if the blocking can come along as that sort of smash and cash tight end where he's out there in goal line, 12 personnel, but you can go play action, throw him a back shoulder in the red zone, run an RPO with him, a fade, whatever it is. I think he'd be a really useful player in that role. But as a Darren Waller replacement and someone with the full versed athleticism to, be a starting tight end in the league and do all the wide variety of things that Brian Daboll asks of his tight ends. Look, I see what the RAS score says, but the film tells a different story. So I actually thought that it was early when they took Theo Johnson in the 4th round, and I would definitely bet against him being an impact as a rookie here. This actually reminds me a little bit of me standing my ground with Dalton Schultz after the team drafted Luke Schoonmaker for the Cowboys last year, and that aged well. So we'll see how that goes. They also signed my boy Jack Stoll, who will probably actually be this team's tight end 2 for 12 personnel right away. Him and Chris Manhertz, I imagine, will compete for a spot on this roster. They're both kind of blocking specialists. And then Lawrence Cager is a converted wide receiver turned tight end. He's had some usefulness in spots that they might want to keep around at least early in the year to do some of the stuff they wanted to do with Darren Waller, kind of taking that tight end and putting him out at wide receiver. And then you got Tyree Jackson, the converted quarterback, still trying to make that transition to tight end, trying to pave the way for Bo Milton. This is one of the worst running back rooms in terms of the receiving game that we'll talk about in this series. Devin Singletary can catch the ball on a screen and basically turn into a runner after the catch, but just not really the juice to be a separator. Career average depth of target is 0.4 yards. So that tells you everything that he is. He's a check down threat and a screen threat, but not someone you're really designing routes for like you could with a Saquon Barkley. Eric Gray, unproven. Tyrone Tracy is certainly interesting. He was a literal wide receiver at the University of Iowa, goes to Purdue. In his, I believe it was his 5th year, transferred to Purdue. It might have been his 4th year, forgive me. But, spent 2 years at Purdue after a career at Iowa. First year at Purdue was a receiver, and then finally in the final year of his career, which was either year 5 or year 6, converted to running back. So he's got that background, really special athlete, still kind of learning the position. I definitely think his workload early on will come through the receiving game if they want to do some of that stuff they were able to do with Saquon Barkley, flexing them out in empty, out wide, and, actually running routes out of the backfield. I think that's going to kind of be his path to a larger role within the offense, is showing that those receiving skills can translate first. We'll come back to those running backs in just a second, but let's tie a ribbon on the weapon conversation here. Again, they rank with a C grade for me towards the very bottom of the league, ranking in that cluster 28th to 30th overall. what's crazy is this is probably a better group of weapons than they've had. We had a moment of excitement with Darren Waller coming in here, but there's actual real upside here for Neighbors to be that alpha go-to guy, and for, as the kids say, for this ranking to age like milk. So very excited to see him, and I think there's usefulness in this room as well, especially with Brian Daboll. So it's a low-ranking group, but relative to what they've had, I'm excited to see it. Let's talk about the running back room as contributors to the run game. And it's right back into that cluster that we've been in for a lot of these teams, ranking 21st to 28th in the league with a C+ grade, a group that is going to allow them to do what they want to do in the run game, as long as Devin Singletary's healthy, but certainly not going to really elevate the run game much at all. And there's not a ton to say here either. I do think Singletary has been underrated. I think basically the Bills missed him. They missed his presence between the tackles, his vision, his ability to make the first guy miss. I think he's got one of the most underrated jump cuts in the league. He goes to Houston last year, which was a new operation for him, a wide zone style offense, had to kind of basically beat out Dameon Pierce, which he did. He beat out Dameon Pierce, and as the year went on, for one of the worst run blocking units in the league and a scheme that didn't really fit his game, he still finished the second half of the year very productive, had some big games for the Texans down the stretch, and finally gets like a multi-year contract here with the Giants. He has become kind of my poster boy for the skilled but not talented running back, where he doesn't have the speed, he doesn't have the size, never going to wow you, never going to have probably a Pro Bowl season or anything like that, but he can really get the job done and even have some individual games where you're like, okay, Devin Singletary, I see you. So I like him, but the fall off after him is pretty wild. They clearly want to just give these young guys a look and see if they maybe struck lightning in a bottle between Eric Gray, who was a 5th-round pick with some talent out of Oklahoma last year, and then Tyrone Tracy, who we just mentioned, another 5th-round pick this year out of Purdue. I think both these guys are sprinkled in, just given a chance to kind of see what they can do. Whether that's, Eric, you're the backup this week. Tracy, you're the backup next week, and you're getting 6 touches a game or whatever. Or if it's putting a guy in for a drive, or they both get 3 or 4 touches throughout the game, they're just going to get sprinkled in. While Singletary, ironically, is the closest. I can't say the closest thing to a bell cow back we have in the league, but most of these teams are going running back by committee. I think ironically Devin Singletary is it's his backfield here, which you don't see a whole lot of that, so might even have some fantasy football value there for Devin Singletary just from a volume perspective. But you have the threat of really both these guys, like Eric Gray and Tyrone Tracy, looking good and eating into that volume as the season goes on. And I really would just kind of lump these guys together. I think people are going to gravitate towards Tyrone Tracy, who was the more recent, exciting 5th-round pick. I think Eric Gray was a solid 5th-round prospect as well. Productive guy at Oklahoma who has light feet and some instinctive ability as a runner, just not the fastest guy, and does have some questions with his vision in terms of consistently taking what's there. Whereas Tyrone Tracy is just a little bit more polarizing in the sense that he's kind of this weird converted wide receiver turned running back. You look at him and he looks like a wide receiver. He's got more of that kind of lengthy frame, whereas a guy like Eric Gray's got a little more, contact balance, a little more junk in the trunk. But man, Tracy was super effective at Purdue. He's got the speed, really good receiving chops, obviously. So I definitely understand why you'd be, excited about him, but I do still think he has a lot to prove in terms of, being able to run all the NFL runs, showing that patience to let blocks set up. It just, as of this time, it's not his natural position, but some of the instincts really kicked in for him, obviously, at Purdue. So tough to say if or when or who of those two are going to break through and start getting 10, 11, 12, 15, 20 touches, fully take over as the starter. I think it's in the realm of possibilities for both of those guys as the season goes on, probably more so with Tracy than Gray from an upside lens. But if I had to bet on this, I think it's Devin Singletary's backfield. I think it's still Devin Singletary's backfield. Reminds me a lot of what happened with Devin Singletary in Buffalo. They kept bringing in these mid-round guys that were more athletically gifted than him, and they just weren't better than Devin Singletary. So if I had to bet on it, that's how this is going to play out, and that Singletary is going to continue to be a good running back, and on paper, the only good running back in this room. And then we did already talk about it, but this team does get a fairly significant multiplier from the quarterback in the run game. I think the biggest thing here is we got to see if Daniel Jones can come back from that ACL injury. I'm going to trust the recovery window that he has and modern science that he can get back at least pretty close to the speed that he has. And with Jones, it's he's more like long build-up speed as opposed to quick twitch athleticism, which I feel like with an ACL recovery, that might be more of the question. So I think he'll be all right. And it's a real thing, man. Like we mentioned, in 2022, 700 yards, 7 touchdowns. That wasn't including the playoff game against Minnesota where he had another 96 rushing yards or something. I don't know why 96 is the number that came to my mind, but he ran all over the field against the Vikings to help win a playoff game. It's a real thing, man. It opens things up. He's genuinely good at it. I put him stumbling on his own in that legendary Thursday night game against the Eagles as the picture there, just because it's hilarious. But besides that, I mean, he genuinely has good vision and good speed. I think linebackers and slot corners misjudge how fast he is, and he breaks a lot of angles. I don't get how he ran a 4.81 because you watch him on the field and he can blaze, man. I mean, that run against the Eagles, I think, was a top 5 miles per hour play on the season. He just was running so fast, he tripped himself up. But obviously, hopefully they can get that guy back and tap back into that because it was a big part of their run in 2022. But let's talk about the offensive line. It's definitely not the most optimistic conversation, though relative to last year, I think it'll be better. I mean, it's going to be hard not to be. I think I might have said the Titans were the second worst offensive line last year. After having to rewatch some of these Giants games, I take that back. I think the Giants were worse than the Titans, which is saying a lot. And the Giants were actually maybe, at least in the first half of last season, closer to what Bryce Young had to do with the Panthers. It was a nightmare. And they're hoping to turn a corner here. Obviously, the biggest addition this team made is that Carmen Bracillo, getting the offensive line coach upgraded there. But getting franchise left tackle Andrew Thomas back healthy for the full season this time should be a good starting point. I don't think it's a coincidence that things did improve when he returned around that week 9 mark. You can leave him on an island. You don't have to slide guards his way. You're able to release tight ends and running backs quicker to get the ball out quicker if pressure does get in. It's a numbers changer having an elite tackle versus having Marcus McKeithen and Josh Aswedu trying to play left tackle for you. And it's been really fun to see him turn into this guy. The first year, overreaction football world was like, oh my God, this team screwed up not taking Tristan Wirfs, who had basically an elite season in his first year. But second year on, both those guys have basically just been elite tackles. And, sure, maybe the Giants would flip Thomas for Tristan Wirfs if everything was equal, but they're very happy with Andrew Thomas as that 4th overall pick, the first tackle off the board. There's just really not a bad word to say about him. I think clearly has the work ethic and drive to be great after year 1 was a little more up and down. But all the traits are there. I thought his athleticism was always underrated. He's so fluid as a pass protector, but he's underrated as a run blocker too, where he's really, really good. He's kind of like if Laramie Tunsil had a little bit more of a mean streak in the run game. That's kind of how I view Andrew Thomas. And I feel like he could still be getting better too, to the point where he could be the best left tackle in the league. So they do have that, right? That's a good piece to start with. But beyond that, there's a lot of questions here, man. So they do bring in Jermaine Illuminor from the Raiders, who's been a very solid, to dare I say even good, right tackle for the Raiders, obviously following Carmen Bracillo over. And at least to start, it seems he's going to be at left guard. And we'll talk about Evan Neal. I understand it, but I'm not sure that that is this team's best combination necessarily with what we saw from Evan Neal last year. I love that he brings the flexibility to just slide out to right tackle. And in theory, if your biggest hole on your offensive line is a guard, as opposed to a right tackle who's on an island, it's much easier to protect that player and elevate the offensive line. But with this being their combination out the gate, you're going to have some concerns, not just with Evan Neal, who again we'll talk about, but Jermaine Illuminor is not nearly as proven as a guard. And it isn't always Madden where you can just flip that D-pad and all of a sudden everything translates to guard. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Really no reason, though, with Illuminor, who has the size and the play strength and the experience, has played all over the line for a variety of different teams and schemes, no reason to believe that he can't be a very solid guard and well worth the signing. So overall, I do like it. And then I'm going to come back to John Michael Schmitz in a second, but I also like the signing of John Runyon and what he could do for a John Michael Schmitz. But John Runyon is a very, very stable pass-protecting guard. It's the reason Runyon got $10 million as opposed to all these other guards that were getting 13, 14, 16, 19 million. Even if John Runyon's sort of pass protection metrics are better than some of these guards that have gotten paid more, his lack of play strength and ability to move guys off the ball and his lack of athletic levers to be a factor in that part of the game is ultimately why Green Bay let him go. And it's something that holds him back from being a plus player. But for what this team needs as just a secure, good starting guard as a pass protector, someone with left and right side flexibility, doesn't need any coaching. You know exactly what he is. If left one-on-one, he can get outmanned by bigger, more powerful bull rushers, but not really a guy you're going to get around too easily. He is a former tackle with quick feet and, again, excellent technique. Not a surprise coming from a Green Bay offensive lineman. So a very practical signing. And then the hope is with two solid guards next to John Michael Schmitz, who was, in my opinion, the best center prospect in last year's draft and was overall kind of a steal for the Giants. Like, honestly, I know year one, it didn't look good to have this take, but this is where I was coming from last year. It was like if the Giants just took John Michael Schmitz in the first round with the 25th pick or whatever they had, I would have said, great, that adds up. Nice pick. They get him in the second round. And it was rough, man. Lost a lot of reps. Really struggled with stunts. And when they did find him one-on-one, he just couldn't really hang. Hard to say if he just sucks or if he got caught up in the suck. You know what I'm saying? So it's a big year for him to kind of show us what he truly is. I wasn't the only one that was really pounding the table for JMS. He was a damn good prospect. He's an excellent run blocker, especially as a wide zone guy, which they don't run a ton of that here for the Giants. So I think when they asked him to kind of drown guys out on gap and pin and pull, his play strength maybe wasn't quite as great to do that, but can he improve that into year two? Absolutely. So getting with some better players to handle stunts, to work on double teams, to teach him a thing or two, not just having Carmen Brasillo as a much better offensive line coach, but to have a guy like John Runyon, who's been such a technician on the inside, to be kind of a mentor. There's no reason to believe John Michael Schmitz can't be a good center in the NFL. So I'm certainly not giving up on him. Now, Evan Neal, another guy I was super high on, was my number one tackle in that draft, as he was with most people. I went as far as saying, I'll hold my hand up. I said it. I said he would be a better pick at number one for the Jags than Trayvon Walker. I also said Garrett Wilson, so I covered my ass a little bit there. I just wasn't a fan of Trayvon Walker, but that's how high I was on Evan Neal. I thought he was in the conversation for the best player in that draft class, and they got him, what was it, the fifth pick, sixth pick, something like that. I thought he was going to be damn good. And I watched this dude's tape, and he doesn't have it. Some of the worst feet, some of the worst technique, some of the worst body control you'll ever see for an offensive tackle. And none of that was really evident when he played left tackle at Alabama. So this could be a classic case of hand-eye coordination. He can't play on the right side of the line. Could be a case of horrible offensive line coach leading to a lack of confidence and getting just kind of in his own head. Or it could be a case of he just sucks. Massive, massive question mark. Probably the biggest question mark for this Giants team this year is what the hell is Evan Neal? And there is a part of me that wants to believe in the upside that with a coach that has taken a lot of, let's just call it what it is, nobodies at right tackle, Jermaine Illuminor, Thayer Munford, and the likes for the Raiders. He's taken those guys and turned them into quality players. Who's to say he can't get Evan Neal, who's one of the freakier offensive tackle prospects to come out in recent memory, and turn him into at least a quality tackle? So I understand the thinking of at least starting him at right tackle because you have to find out. You spent too much on him. The theoretical upside is still too high, but they have a lot of work to do, and I tweeted this out, but if Carmen Brasillo can turn Evan Neal into a good tackle, I am ready to say he's the best offensive line coach in the league because I think he's already worked miracles with the Raiders. So it's a big thing to keep an eye on there, but I just can't emphasize enough how bad he's been when he's played. They had to bench him as a part of that offensive line getting better in the second half of last year. They went to Tyree Phillips, who is still on the street as a free agent after benching Evan Neal, and he was a substantial upgrade. So that's where we're coming from with him. Now, if he hits, this thing's going to flip in a hurry. It really is, because that means Illuminor's staying at guard. I think it's going to be very healthy for John Michael Schmitz to get better. And all of a sudden, you got a bookend tackle center duo with some good vets at guard. All right, we're cooking with gas now. This could be a top 10 offensive line if they can work magic with Evan Neal. So that's why you have to start him. But you can see, ranking these teams at their floor, what having probably the worst starting tackle in the NFL out there week 1 does to your offensive line rankings. They come in 27th overall with a C grade for pass protection, 20th to 25th, and even lower for run blocking, 28th to 29th. What's crazy about Evan Neal is he's been almost as bad as a run blocker as he is as a pass blocker. You would think a guy with these traits would at least have the confidence to take out his frustrations with how bad he is as a pass blocker and use his size and traits to dominate guys in the run game. No, he guesses himself. He's got slow feet. He can't get his hands on dudes. So it's just been bad, man. In terms of the depth, it's tough because they basically just went to their pro scouting department and said, fill out our room. We're getting rid of everybody. Outside of some of the guys they've drafted in recent years with Josh Azwedu and Marcus McKeithen, they just brought in a bunch of vets. So Yanni Kajust, third-round pick for the Patriots, I would say he is in the category of offensive tackles that Carmen Brasillo has worked wonders with, a traitsy kind of third-round pick for the Pats that hasn't worked yet, but maybe someone to keep an eye on. Matt Nelson, a converted tight end that's still developing his game, so at least a couple of somewhat interesting backup names. Josh Azwedu's been a disaster as an interior guy. Talk about bad technique. Can say the same thing about Marcus McKeithen, who was probably the worst of the guys that they had to play last year. You've got some more like higher floor veteran guys that have played. Aaron Stinney was the left guard for the Bucs for Tom Brady, was fine. Austin Schlottman started about a couple months for the Vikings, I believe, in 2022. Might have even started against Dexter Lawrence in that playoff game, potentially. Jimmy Morrissey, more of a backup center type. And then they even have Jalen Mayfield in the building, who was a second-round pick for the Falcons. He's actually been a good run blocker. One of the biggest turnstiles you'll ever see as a pass protector, though. But it's going to be an open competition, and they're hoping the coaching kind of lift this group up. But certainly, kind of the biggest deal for this team is what the hell is going to happen with this offensive line now and moving forward. So the offense ultimately comes out as my 26th ranked offense. Obviously, Brian Daboll doing a significant part of the heavy lifting there, as he has done the last couple of years. 22nd in run game and 28th in passing game. But let's talk about the defense. We're going to start with the defensive line. By far the biggest strength of this football team, and outside of Brian Daboll, I would say the other big reason why I'm quote-unquote higher on the Giants with this 27 spot. But yeah, it's a special group, man, that could be even better depending on how Kayvon Thibodeau turns out this year. But Dexter Lawrence is right there in the conversation now with Aaron Donald retiring for the best interior defensive lineman in the league. He is a legitimate Defensive Player of the Year candidate, not off of pass rush numbers necessarily, though he's a very productive pass rusher. But when you look at how often he's double teamed as a pass rusher, hurting his production, but adding in what he does for the defense. I mean, this was not a good run defense last year, but the run stops they did get were, 60, 70% of the time because of Dexter Lawrence. He's an absolute monster. And it's hard to imagine another year where the guys around him just can't take advantage of his basically force multiplying effect in the run game. But it's just like a jaw-dropping experience watching his film, because there's guys that are his size that teams try to put at nose tackle and try to do the stuff that Dexter Lawrence can do, and it just doesn't happen, especially in the pass rushing department. But even as a run defender, not only does he eat blocks and demand double teams, but he splits them. He keeps his eye in the backfield. He just, disposes of guys trying to block him at will. And then he has the quick feet and good tackling ability to finish plays as well. And then as a rusher, that's especially where, again, you see guys his size just can't do the stuff he does. He's able to threaten different angles and, points of leverage that a lot of defensive tackles can threaten with quickness and technique, but certainly not at that size. And if you're, pile driving dudes or, pulling off swims and rips and attacking dudes' hips while you do it with this size and play strength, it's just something he can't really handle one-on-one. Does get double teamed a lot, rightfully so. And the only thing that, it's not a negative, but I think it's something that could help him take even that one last step to be Hall of Fame lock, easily best interior player, Defensive Player of the Year winner. Again, not a knock, but if he wants to take that one last little hop step forward or whatever, I think a little bit more of a killer instinct when he does get one-on-ones. Watching through his tape, it's obviously incredible. There's some times where teams so dared leave him one-on-one, and when you watch Chris Jones, you watch Aaron Donald, you watch Quinnen Williams, in the rare chances they get to rush the passer where they are single-teamed, they take advantage of those moments. They recognize that they go all out in those moments. With Lawrence, there were snaps, where he gets one-on-one, he's against an inferior guard, he should be able to take that guy, dispose of him, drive him back, do whatever he wants with him. And it's not that he's trying and unable to do it, it's just he's waiting for something. And it could be he's asked to be a contain rush, it could be his instincts are missing, it could be he's tired from what they ask him to do in run defense. I don't know necessarily why he wouldn't take those opportunities and make the most of them, but those are those moments where I want Dexter Lawrence to have that full-blown killer instinct all the time. I know it's a lot to ask, but it's the only negative thing I have to say about him. So he's incredible. What's crazy, though, and we talked about this earlier, is they have nobody else next to him. And I understood the Leonard Williams trade. I actually think it was fantastic what they were able to get for him. But they've done nothing to replace that piece. They don't need a great number 2 next to Dexter Lawrence, but they let A'Shawn Robinson go as well. I would feel much better about this group if they had an A'Shawn Robinson or something like that. So I don't necessarily know what free agents are out there or what they can do about it. Is there a trade piece out there that could come in and be a better piece next to Dexter Lawrence? But the remaining interior defensive line conversation dies very quickly. And honestly, it's kind of a shame that this team has Dexter Lawrence, yet my D-line run defense grade for them is only a B. This should be an A+ D-line run defense, because you don't need anything special next to Dexter Lawrence. You just need guys that can be relatively efficient and get the job done. That's not Jordan Phillips. Phillips is basically a designated pass rusher interior piece as a pocket pusher. It's basically all he's good for. It's basically all he's been good for. He's been living off the reputation of a 10-sack season that he had 5 years ago for the Bills. If he's your fifth piece like he was for Buffalo last year, that's fine. But for him to be your number two is honestly kind of unacceptable. I like Rakeem Nunez-Roches as a rotational fourth guy that can do some scrappy grunt work and be a piece. But he's their next best run defender after Dexter Lawrence. And if they're smart about it, he'll be the guy that has to play a lot of early down work next to Dexter Lawrence. You got some developmental recent draft picks in Jordan Riley and DJ Davidson. Davidson was horrific last year. And then, Ryder Anderson is more of a undersized pass rusher that's gotten some play in the league. And Timmy Horn, he did some stuff in Atlanta, but it couldn't sustain it. Again, the conversation ends very quickly. I would love to see this team get somebody else, because it is a bit of an eyesore there. But you go back to the edge group, and it's like, ooh, I like this, man. You got Brian Burns, who, to me, still hasn't taken that step towards being a true number one. I think he's on the fence of being a really low-end one and a really high-end two. Luckily, in this case, he kind of is a two. And maybe with the attention suck that is Dexter Lawrence, Burns can get opened up a little bit more. But I still really like this trade, because while I think there are some aspects of Brian Burns that are overrated in terms of consistency and overall production, and is he worth $29 million? I think it was a slight overpay, but an overpay that this team needed to make, because he is still a really good player and amplifies this group tremendously from what it was last year. He's got incredible speed, incredible bend. He's got a spin move. He's relentless. He's a team leader. He tries against the run, though he doesn't have the most amazing play strength. I do think ultimately with Burns, the lack of consistent power in his rush is what leads to some of the inconsistency in his game. Feels like tackles can pretty consistently set in a certain way, because they feel like if they can get their hands on him, they can control Brian Burns. And for the most part, they're right. Burns shows flashes of the bull rush. You could probably find 5 to 10 times in a season where he really converts that speed to power and can drive a guy back. But again, it's just not there consistently throughout the course of the season. So that's what's kind of missing on him, but a great acquisition that should make this group much better than it was last year, and allows Kayvon Thibodeau to go from your number 2 to your number 3, and should leave him wide open for one-on-one opportunities, something he really hasn't gotten a ton of. And had an interesting conversation with Bengal about this. Not to spoil the whole conversation, I'll leave some of it for you guys to listen to, but long story short, there's aspects of the Wink Martindale system with the stunting and the blitzing that help his overall production in terms of pressures and sacks to get those schemed up, clean rush looks. But in terms of the development for Kayvon Thibodeau, Bengal made a great point where in that scheme, with all those blitzes, he's not always getting those opportunities to refine his skill set, develop a pass rush plan throughout the course of a game, and now getting Brian Burns opposite of him and a scheme that's a little bit more just north and south, no nonsense. Do we see, I can't say the production come up for Kayvon Thibodeau because he had 11 and a half sacks last season, but the reality is a lot of it was schemed up. Him chasing guys down that Dexter Lawrence had flushed out of the pocket, or him looping on a stunt, coming open. Out of 120 players, he was 101st in pass rush win rate. Similar to Brian Burns, we haven't seen him unlock that bull rush that I felt like was something that should have been a weapon for him at this point in his career. He used it at Oregon, and it just hasn't been a consistent asset for him. Again, the bull rush got to come along, but continuing to refine that pass rush plan. He basically just wins with speed, bend, and swipe moves right now, and pursuit. You need more than that, especially for what you drafted him to be. If this is all he is, he's a capable number 3. Would love him to improve his run defense, where, frankly, the effort and gap discipline is abysmal. Could that come back to coaching? Potentially. But unfortunately, I would say he has not lived up to my expectations of what I thought was one of the steals of that draft. And he's been solid, still young, still could get there, still has the traits. But for a guy that did have questions about some of the off-field stuff, I would say to this point in his career, that has mostly come to fruition, where he's not a bad player because of his physical tools, but does he have the instincts and desire to become a truly elite player, which he's capable of? Still to be determined. I'm not saying yes, I'm not saying no, but I think it's a legit question. Don't want to just forget about Azeez Ojulari either. I think, if nothing else, as a guy that comes in off the bench, gives you 350 snaps throughout the year. I don't think he's a truly horrible run defender. He's got some different ways to win as a rusher. He's a good backup. Probably not counting on him to turn into a quality starter at this point, but a useful player. As I would say about Boogie Basham, he's a pair of second-round picks that just, frankly, never had the highest upside, but have, I would say at this stage, settled in as good backups off the edge. It's really all you got to worry about. Tomon Fox and some undrafted types shouldn't be seeing the field too much here. But obviously the edge group is much better and deeper than the interior group. Overall, it's a really good group, man. I have them ranked in the top 7 for overall defensive line, top 8 for pass rush, and top 12 for the D-line run defense, which is tough because it could be so much better. And it's kind of polarizing because, like, one play it looks elite because you just can't get past Dexter Lawrence, and then the next play it's like, oh, they ran away from Dexter Lawrence and nobody else got off a block. So it is a little bit tough to rank that group. But let's talk about the next level with the linebackers. It's actually a good room, especially with the starter, Bobby Okereke. They gave him a big free agent contract, and this was a signing that definitely worked out for the Giants. I like this approach overall. Let an Okereke, who was a bit of a raw third-round pick, come in and, take his lumps for a team like the Colts, develop, wait till they let him walk, and then go pay the guy like a top 10 linebacker once he hits the market, once he's developed and you know what he is. And that's a strategy that has really worked for the Giants. He was effectively the only player in the second level of the defense last year that could tackle anybody. And I would have hate to seen how bad this defense would be without him. He was really all over the field in both phases. He's fast, he's smart, coming out of Stanford, strong, full-sized. I don't have a bad word to say about Bobby Okereke. He's a really good stud linebacker. And then they kind of work around him with a bit of a rotation. Micah McFadden's going to get the majority of the snaps next to Bobby Okereke. He has turned into a decent player for what he is. 5th-round pick, was basically a blitz specialist as a linebacker, but obviously, if you watched him at Indiana, you could see the traits and room for him to develop in more of a real linebacker role. And as the year went on last year, I think we started to see that. He really flew to the ball, and I mean flew to the ball. Like those blitzing instincts at Indiana, they showed up on tape. He missed a lot of tackles, finding himself out of position, diving at ankles, being a little over-aggressive. I think finding that balance here in year 3 is going to be a big question in terms of, can he really develop into an established starter, or is he just kind of a replacement level piece with some splash plays next to Bobby Okereke, which isn't the worst thing in the world to have that kind of heat-seeking playmaker type and a good blitzer next to him. But I'm not going to rule out him continuing to grow into a serviceable number 2 either. But they will rotate him off the field occasionally, and they will just use Isaiah Simmons as a dime linebacker. They acquired him from Arizona, and obviously Simmons is not ever going to, well, hard to say never, but at this stage, you're certainly not betting on him to turn into the, potential superstar top 10 pick that he was for Arizona. Ultimately has had a hard time finding the right role. I still think in a Kyle Hamilton role, if the Seahawks or the Chargers wanted to go take Isaiah Simmons and see if he can do what Kyle Hamilton does, I still think he could be really good in that role. But it's just, there's only so many spots and coaching staffs that are able to use you that way. But the Giants do some of that stuff with him, bringing him in on third downs, playing him between the box, playing him in the slot. He's essentially their dime back in a lot of ways, and he actually did some serviceable stuff. The problem with him and why you can't say he's Kyle Hamilton is Hamilton understands pursuit angles and how to tackle and how to basically be a weapon on early downs. Isaiah Simmons is only an athletic, lengthy body as a coverage weapon over the middle of the field. He does not have the instincts and certainly not the tackling ability and ability to get off blocks that Kyle Hamilton does. So I have to take back those words a little bit because I think Ravens fans think I'm a Kyle Hamilton hater. But that's besides the point. He is a useful third down linebacker that you have to put into at least the picture here in terms of guys that'll be getting, important snaps for this team. It's actually quietly a somewhat deep group. Matthew Adams has been a very good special teamer for the Colts and has, done his job as a backup and has been around. I think as, bringing him in, reuniting him with Bobby Okereke makes sense as a depth signing. And then, you got Darius Masau, who's a really smart player at UCLA, is lacking some of those traits. Darian Beavers, basically repeat those points with him at Cincinnati. Carter Coughlin, more of a converted edge piece. You got some interesting names to fill out the depth chart there, but it's not a bad linebacker room. It's really not. You wish you had a better number 2 next to Okereke, but the way they use McFadden and Simmons, they kind of complement each other well, and ultimately they come in the top third of the league, top 12 for me for the overall linebacker grade, B- across the board for overall coverage and run defense, grading out this group. But then the secondary. My lowest ranked secondary in the NFL, 32nd in the league, in case you forgot how many teams are in the NFL. But you know what this group reminds me of? If you want a positive thing to say here, is it reminds me a little bit of the Bears secondary in their deep dive last year. They ranked a little bit higher, 20th last year, but it was the same thing where I like the direction they're going here. There's a bunch of fun players. It's a young group that's going to get to grow together. All guys that I think deserve starting chances in the league. It's just interesting that they're all getting those chances together, and there's not really a piece in this group where you point to, and it's like, oh, they can hang their hat on that guy. They're hoping that's going to be Deonte Banks, which is where we'll start this conversation. I'm a big Deonte Banks guy. I want to say he ended up like my 11th player in last year's draft class. I was just a huge fan of him. They get him in the 20s, and, he had a rookie cornerback season, which it's tough to play corner in this league, especially for this Giants defense last year that oftentimes put him on an island one-on-one against the opponent's best wide receiver and said, okay, rookie, you got Garrett Wilson this week. Whoever it might be, good luck. And he had some good games. He had some bad games. I think you did see some of the grabbiness, some of the inability to always get his head around and understand that awareness to find the ball. Those were his weaknesses at Maryland. But you also saw all the things you like. The size, the speed, the physicality, the run defense, the press coverage, the man-to-man ability oftentimes. And especially the zone stuff was good too for him. Should get an opportunity to do a little bit more of that here. So for me, the arrow is absolutely pointing up for Deonte Banks. He has number 1 corner potential, had an inconsistent but solid rookie season, and let's go. Let's see him prove it, right? Then Drew Phillips, their 3rd round pick, should be starting for them. Drew Phillips, just like Deonte Banks last year, was my guy in this draft. He was, I think, my 8th ranked corner. I had him certainly ranked ahead of a lot of other corners that were drafted before him. I think he's on the fringe of, being a starting caliber prospect in the sense of you saw enough with his quick feet, his high IQ, athletic quickness as well, to snap onto routes, a frisky player on the back end. Shades of Jair Alexander in terms of the hip fluidity, the foot speed, some of those snappy reps from off-zone coverage where he sees it and he can squeeze that space like that. You see some of that stuff. Just doesn't have the long speed of a Jair Alexander. But I think it was a great pick. And like I said, should be probably starting in the league because he's an exciting prospect. But you put him in this room where it's like he's surrounded by 4 other question marks. It's like, it'd be nicer if he was just the one piece that had to prove himself, as opposed to he's a part of 5 guys that have to prove themselves. But like the player, could see this becoming one of the more exciting cornerback duos in the league within the next 500 days, let's call it. You get what I'm saying? I like these guys. They're just entirely unproven and can't be ranked too highly. And then Cordell Flott, I'm not quite as sure about. I will admit, though, getting through the Giants film, he kept popping to me, and I regret not capturing some of those plays because sometimes, you see a play by a guy like Cordell Flott, and it's like, oh, do we really want to highlight this guy and spend time collecting footage? Is he really going to be a dude for the Giants? And then, get through the games, and I'm like, dang, there was like 4 or 5 plays that were really nice pass breakups by Cordell Flott. Interesting player, man. I walked out of my film study on this team higher on him than I thought I would be. I thought he was okay last year. His grading profile was adequate as well. He didn't just play in the slot as well. His nickname, Cordell Slot, because he played only slot at LSU. But I always felt like that wasn't who he had to be. He's a lanky, 6 foot, 175-pound corner whose build would suggest he should play outside. And he got some more opportunities to play outside last year with Shane Bowen and Tennessee's defense. They haven't necessarily been confined to you're our slot corner. They have a preferred slot guy, but they'll move guys around depending on matchups and stuff. And I think Flott's got potential to be, piece for this secondary, if not as a starter, as like a really good 4th corner that can kind of match up all over the place. But I think he could be a starter as well. The main question here is Banks isn't a slot guy. He's someone you want outside as your number 1. And then both Flott and Phillips are skinny, horrible run defenders. And I certainly prefer to have a good run defender in the slot, someone that can be an extension of your linebacking staff, and neither of these guys are going to be able to do that. So they're going to have to kind of figure that out. But let's talk about the safeties before we go to the depth chart. Jason Pinnock, another guy, just like Cordell Flott, where didn't think I'd be talking about him a whole lot. Passed up on recording clips for him as I was doing my film studies, and then got through my 3 games, and I'm like, I probably should have grabbed some stuff on Pinnock because he made some plays. He was solid as a safety. He will be a starter. Converted corner, tested really well coming out, was drafted by the Jets. Couldn't make that team, stays in state, goes to the Giants. I like that trajectory for him. There's a lot of safeties in the league that were day 3 corners, changed teams, got an opportunity at safety, proved themselves over the years. I'm not going to quite go as far as saying the arrow's pointing up and he's going to become this like stud safety, but he's balanced. He can go man-to-man. I think the zone skills are coming along, which is what's exciting there. His run defense is pretty good for a converted corner. The only drawbacks is he's a little bit high-hipped in terms of watching him run in space. Can he really turn and show the range as a true free safety? I think that's still to be determined. And just the overall production has just been so-so. So, I think for now he's an okay starter. Could be a big year for him. Could be kind of a sneaky breakout. Could also just be, an adequate piece. But again, I walked out a little bit higher on him after watching his film. Tyler Nubin as well, a 2nd-round pick. And I liked Nubin, but admittedly, as a Gophers fan and someone that was insanely high on Antoine Winfield, I think he was like my 16th player in that draft class, really pounded the table for Winfield. I've pounded the table for a lot of Gophers players over the years. Didn't necessarily pound the table for Tyler Nubin. Not that I think he's a bad player. I think he's a very high-floor safety. Definitely the smartest safety in this draft. Potentially the most complete run defender, top-down in terms of pursuit angles, tackling consistency, just being a good high-floor player. I compared him to guys like Jordan Fuller and Cameron Curl. It was a safe pick. They needed someone that could come in and start right away. I don't think it was a bad pick by any stretch of the imagination. I just thought there were other safeties that were so much better athletes with better upside that also had good tape that would have gotten me a little bit more excited about him coming in and kind of growing with this secondary. But I do think Nubin will be a solid player. Might have some bumps along the road here, as do pretty much any young defensive back. And I actually think his his kind of lack of athleticism, where he does have tight hips, struggles to kind of turn and burn and click and close and all that stuff. The long speed, if he's trying to keep up on a deep cross or a deep post, he'll lag behind a little bit. That in a weird way, a lot of times we talk about, the raw athlete is a, boom or bust type of prospect, whereas, a lack of athleticism can actually lead to coverage inconsistency as well, where if the right team can put the wrong player on you that you just can't keep up with, you can have some really ugly looking inconsistent weeks. So it is a worry for me with Tyler Nubin. Watching through all these safeties, there were reps where I felt like his feet were just stuck in quicksand at times. And it was kind of reflected in his testing numbers. So hence the Jordan Fuller and Cameron Curl comps, who are solid players but nothing special. So an interesting starting five with potential, specifically in the cornerback room. But they've got some depth as well, some other guys that they've invested in and given opportunities in the cornerback room, especially Trey Hawkins was starting for them week 1 last year as a rookie, 6th-round pick out of Old Dominion with really good traits. It was as inconsistent as you would expect for a 6th-round rookie out of Old Dominion thrown into a week 1 starting job, but certainly not someone you want to give up on. Someone that could threaten the jobs of guys like Drew Phillips and Cordell Flott, certainly. Darnay Holmes still hanging around here, still very young. Darnay was like 20 when he got drafted. I remember liking him coming out, really kind of scrappy slot corner out of UCLA, pushed his curriculum forward and to graduate in 3 years so that he could go pro. And honestly, last year, he didn't get a lot of playing time, but showed some flashes when he got out there. Another guy I'm not ready to give up on, especially when we talked about how this team doesn't have a true slot corner. I think he still has a fighter's chance of getting in that mix. Contract year, turns 26 at the end of the month. And then Aaron Robinson as well, once upon a time, a promising, versatile third-round corner prospect, another guy with inside-out flexibility who's going to see the benefit of potential added opportunities as a slot corner here. For him, it's just health. He's played 2 games in the last 2 years, and his rookie season was flooded with injuries as well. So you're obviously not counting on him. Might not make the team, but you got to keep an eye on him at least. Nick McLeod saw the field last year. David Long has bounced around and played some snaps. It's actually quietly a very deep room because it needs to be. They needed to raise the floor as much as possible with this group. They're going to have their struggles. I think that's pretty clear. But with that pass rush in front of them, there's a world where this emerges as the 20th best secondary this year, and these guys look good as rookies, and you're feeling good about this group, similar to what we kind of compared them to the Bears. And the safety depth is hardly worth mentioning. Again, they signed Jalen Phillips to raise the floor of that. Jalen Mills, to raise the floor of that group. Dane Belton, still in development, very young, coming out of Iowa, freaky athletic traits, can't tackle to save his life. Javarius Owens was a very raw 7th-round pick last year. Can he take a step another year in the league? So it's a lot of guys like that. It's a very young, interesting secondary. A secondary I would want for my Madden rebuilds because there's youth and upside here that is probably going to show a little bit more downside this year with the promise of upside next year maybe. But let's recap the defense. They are 24th on defense overall. Pretty down the middle, both in terms of run defense and pass defense. They came in 24th for run defense. I do think the new scheme should help. They had a lot of blown lanes, and I think the emergence of Micah McFadden as a solid LB2 in run defense as the year went on should help there as well. They were like 29th in run defense last year, so I think we get a little bit better there, but obvious concerns with the other D linemen, not named Dexter Lawrence, and some of the support from the second level, specifically from the slot. And then in terms of pass defense, the pass rush doing pretty much all of the heavy lifting there. It's pretty impressive, honestly, that they are a top 8 pass rush, in my opinion, and I think that's very fair when you look at the talent in that room. Yet they're not even a top 20 defense for me. They're tied for 22nd. That's actually impressive because pass rush carries a large amount of weight for me. The linebacker group is fine, but that's quote unquote, the running back of the defense. It's not as important as defensive back coverage. And they are obviously dragged down by what that secondary looks like, at least out the gate. But if Thibodeau takes a step up, if the young corners look good, if the coaching is better than you think with Shane Bowen taking the reins here, I mean, there is upside with this defense. You compare this defensive roster to what it was a couple years ago, and while you're not expecting great things this year, you're expecting those learning curves. There's a direction here, something you can kind of get behind. So it'll be a fun group to see how they kind of grow throughout the year. Let's talk a little special teams. They came in 20th for me for special teams. It's a little bit harder for this team. They're very unique in the sense that Graham Gano in 2022 was an elite level kicker. Last year was solid, was great actually, and then had a rain game against the Jets, missed a couple kicks that destroyed his PFF grade for last year, and then he got injured and missed the second half of the year. So I had to kind of thread the needle and adjust that grade for really who Graham Gano is. But that should be a boost to what was a pretty low-ranking special teams last year and should leave this team back towards the middle with special teams. I also do like some of the additions to guys like Matthew Adams as a very experienced special teamer. Some of their coverage metrics in terms of kickoffs and punts and stuff were really bad, and I think he'll be an asset in that regard. But let's wrap everything up. Obviously, a team that doesn't have playoff expectations, doesn't have anybody pounding the table for this team. It's a transition season where you're looking at Daniel Jones as a bridge quarterback. They're, in the bottom third of the league for both offense and defense, but much more of a plan, I would say, in terms of new pieces. Hope that some of these groups can finish the year ranking much higher than where I have them coming into the year right here for this series. I think in terms of strengths and weaknesses, though, you do have a couple things to hang your hat on and build around that are real things. I think having the coaching staff that they have is reason for optimism, for the weaponry to step up, for the offensive line to figure itself out. You could even throw the addition of Carmen Brasillo in there as a strength. And then to have a defensive line like this now, I mean, it was good last year, but it's supposed to be great this year with Brian Burns coming in, Thibodeau in year 3. If that D-line can be a legit menacing force, that's a huge force multiplying effect towards helping guys, especially in the secondary, hit their ceiling. So while this team might have more holes and more weaknesses than a lot of the teams we've talked about, those are probably two of the biggest strengths that we've featured in this series so far too. So certainly some polarizing aspects to this team in that regard. But just to reiterate, they've got a low upside quarterback. They know what the ceiling is on this team, and that paints a cloud over the whole organization. When you don't have the hope of a Will Levis or Drake May or whoever it might be, that we might have that dude. You might put the bench press down a rep early or show up 10 minutes later to practice or whatever, hope can go a long way, and they just don't really have that on and off the field right now. They are also heavily relying on a rookie for the weaponry. While I talked about how if Malik Neighbors is as great as we think he could be, they could go from a C-ranked group of weapons to a B-ranked group of weapons within the year. If he's not as good as we think he is, and his floor is not as good, and this is a Quentin Johnston type of situation for some reason. I mean, I really don't think that's going to be the case. But if it is, this is like the worst group of weapons in the league. So they're really relying on a young 21-year-old to be the future of their offense. That's risky. Right tackle is just a massive magnifying glass on what the hell is going to happen there. And then the secondary is going to be really interesting to see if a group that young and unproven can hold up throughout the course of the season. But let's finish by taking a look at this team's schedule, their over-under, and ultimately how many wins I think they get. Their over-under is 6.5 wins. They're tied with the Commanders for division odds right now. They are 27th as well in Super Bowl odds. Obviously not saying this team's going to win the Super Bowl or win the division. We're not quite into that range of teams quite yet where we're betting those things. But in terms of the over-under, I think it's going to get pretty damn close. I really do. I do think Brian Daboll is a coach that gives you a certain floor, but their schedule is not easy. I think they're favored in 2 games. I like that they get Minnesota week 1 because they're a team in transition as well that is probably going to be better in week 15 than they are in week 1. And then Washington week 9, I think they'll be favored at home against. But some tough matchups. They have to play the AFC North, so you're looking at Baltimore, Cincinnati. You got to go to Cleveland. That's not going to be easy as they're trying to figure out this offensive line. It's going to be a big test there week 3 against Myles Garrett and company and the best pass rush in the league. And you got to go to Pittsburgh week 8. So those are tough. They do, however, play the NFC South, which is a nice counterbalancing act to that. And then, of course, a couple of really, 4 really tough games, Dallas twice and Philadelphia twice. So it to me, it's going to be right around there. I think 6 or 7 wins is kind of on the money for this team. So I think Vegas kind of nailed that one. I'd stay away. It feels like a coin toss to me. There's better values out there if you want to get involved in the futures market. But that is going to do it. Hope you guys enjoyed the breakdown of this team. Again, it's this year's not so much about the wins and losses for this team. It's about those individual position groups, the weapons, the O-line, the pass rush, the secondary. Where can we see this growth? Are we talking about a team that can build some momentum into next year? Because right now they certainly don't have a lot of momentum heading into this season, to the point that a lot of people think this ranking is just too high. So let me know in the comments down below what you think of this ranking, what you thought of the deep dive, if I missed anything. But don't go anywhere, because we're going to transition to our awesome interview with Bengal joining us to represent his New York Giants. And now I'm thrilled to welcome back for the 3rd year in a row of the deep dive series to represent his New York Giants, Bengal. And I got to be honest, man, I'm a little jealous of you right now. Number one, your Yankees are back on top of the MLB picture. So congrats on that for now. Yeah, probably going to sweep my Twins for the 2nd time this year here this week. But you also got to play a little NCAA football before the rest of us. So congrats on that, I guess.
It's pretty good. I think we'll see. Or maybe I'm just a shill. Well, hold on. I'm a super
there it is.
Super shill.
All right. Wow.
I'm just a mouthpiece. I say whatever they tell me to. Obviously. I've never said a bad word about Madden. Don't watch my videos.
Yeah, no, can't do that. Well, speaking of having bad words to say about things, let's talk about the New York Giants, who are hoping to be a little bit better than the disaster that was last year. I wanted to hit on some of the bigger questions for this team that is going to start with Brian Daboll, who I'm very high on Brian Daboll. When I talk with a lot of people, I thought 2022 was, in my mind, like no-brainer, coach of the year. I thought he was a great candidate, and like things were looking so good after his first year. And then last year just all went to shit. So I'm curious where you're at kind of with Brian Daboll, who is in a lot of like hot seat debates that I've been seeing out there. Do you think this could be a hot seat season for him, or do you think he's pretty safe? And are you as high on him as me?
Do you mind if I have the mic for a second?
Sorry.
No. I'm just saying. I would first want to say it's a pleasure to be here.
Mm-hmm.
What was your question? Brian Daboll. I don't know. The hot seat stuff is kind of weird because at some point you do have to settle down with your guy, because you can't have, Joe Judge gets it for a year and Pat Shurmur for a year. And, we had a revolving door. If you hired the guy for a reason and he's shown positive trends, like year 1 was a good year, at least, based on expectations. Year 2, certainly not as much. But some of that maybe stems from being a managerial and roster control issue. If you have the worst offensive line in football, yeah, some of that can be attributed to coaching. Is that on Brian Daboll specifically? I would say not. He's not the sole responsible guy for the worst offensive line of all time. 85 sacks allowed last year. But at some point, you do have to return results. And going into year 3, I think that's when you can kind of start to talk about, okay, if this is another 4 or 5 win year, you might be in trouble. But I would say he's probably safe for now. If they can get to 6 or 7 wins, I don't think his job is gone. But you never know. It's New York. Stuff happens. Or New Jersey specifically, the homeland.
Exactly. Yeah, the O-line thing was definitely the biggest surprise to me because I always felt like that was something that his offenses in Buffalo, like they always kind of played above their expectations. So that'll be, I think, a big thing to keep an eye on. And I thought it did get better in the second half of the year for sure. But it does sound like he's taking over play calling. I was kind of curious, coming from that little more like fans perspective. I feel like we all kind of go to the play callers before the players in a lot of cases. So a lot of Giants fans aren't the biggest Mike Kafka fan. I'm curious if you had some frustrations with what the play calling looked like with Mike Kafka, and is the change to Daboll a piece of optimism for this team in your mind?
I think it's an interesting conversation. Kafka is always involved in these head coach rumors. I don't know how he keeps getting these, but he keeps apparently being at the top of head coach searches. But, it's kind of one of those things where the offense struggles the entire game, and then suddenly you see Brian Daboll get the play sheet over his face there. You can't see his mouth, and then the offense starts moving, and you start to wonder, the guy that said he's not going to call plays, he isn't calling plays, and then in the postgame says he didn't call plays, suddenly looks like he might be calling plays, and the offense is actually doing something. Now, I personally, if everything's in the perfect world, DC's calling the defense, OC's calling the offense, head coach is supervising and managing, especially the clock. So if he has to have, all his eggs in just the offensive basket, what does that mean for everything else, especially with the first year DC with the Giants and Shane Bowen? I don't know. But if the offense looks better, which I think it absolutely could under Daboll, I think his biggest strength is as a play caller. It's why he got the entire job in the first place from Buffalo. I think the offense could certainly look better. I think I will give Kafka a bit of a break. Even with Daniel Jones being your best case scenario QB, you got to go down to QB2 with Tyrod Taylor, QB3 with undrafted rookie free agent Tommy DeVito, who wasn't exactly tearing it up at Illinois or Syracuse right before. So the worst offensive line, no receivers. It's just it feels going back to the Eli conversation near the end where he was actually okay still, but everyone's like, this guy's the worst QB ever, even though there was no offensive line and no weapons, period. The Giants have been stuck in this limbo of no offensive talent at all for way too long. So how much of that can you really put on the coaching staff? I don't know. Some of it, obviously, but you got to have talent. The best coaches are not going to be able to get all pro level play out of nothing.
Yeah. No, I think that's probably the right answer. I am excited to see Daboll kind of take the play sheet back, though, just because I do think he can be one of those kind of like, McDaniel, Shanahan level players where those are or play callers where those are head coaches calling the plays. But let's talk a little bit about that offensive line and like kind of how you think it might shake out this year. There's 3 spots that are pretty clear: left tackle, center, and right guard. But in terms of Evan Neal, which has been a complete train wreck, I post a little clip of just like how bad his footwork is, and I just don't know if and how you fix that. Do you think Evan Neal gets the shot at right tackle and it's Illuminor at left guard, or what do you think this O-line is going to look like?
Yeah, I think you're right on the money there. I think that's what they're going to do. I personally would have liked to try out Evan Neal at left guard, get him maybe on a more natural left side. As you know, everything's going to be on that left side of the line. It's what you're familiar with. It's the same type of movement, even at left tackle to left guard, even though you're not setting as deep, right? But everything's flipped over on that other side, and certain guys can take to it. Certain guys struggle. Certain guys take longer. But even look at Penei Sewell, right? That guy was not very good at right tackle immediately, and then is now one of the best right tackles in the NFL. Evan Neal's dealt with some injuries, has looked awful when he's been healthy, to be fair. But I was hoping that, maybe he would move inside and he would, at left guard, get maybe a more natural kind of a movement set for him, something that he was used to doing more often. Now, there are kind of 2 schools of thought on this, which I'm sure you'll agree with. One is it's easy to say just move a guy inside because, he's not on an island anymore. There's not all that space. However, the other side of the coin on that is everything happens faster on the inside. So is a guy that's slow to react on an island just suddenly going to be dominant on the interior where everything's happening that much faster?
Mm-hmm.
It's easier said than done. But yeah, I think it's going to be Illuminor at left guard. He's probably going to be, I don't even want to say the swing player because I swing tackle, right? But I think he moves to right tackle if there's an injury. And then Izudu probably plays left guard. If something happens, we know on the offensive line, injuries happen all the time. But yeah, I think probably Illuminor left guard, which I don't know what that's going to look like. He was actually okay at right tackle with the Raiders. He's got Priscillo coming over as well. Kind of a weird change, but maybe he's great there. I hope. Who knows?
Yeah, he's kind of one of those guys that it's been counterintuitive where he came out and everyone was like, oh, this guy needs to slide inside and be a guard, but his best tape has actually definitely been at tackle. So yeah, it's kind of the old, like, if you have two quarterbacks, you don't have one type of deal at right tackle there and guard. The thing with Neal is like, it's kind of an experiment if he does slide in too, because there's just not a lot of 6'7" guards in the league. So it's like, is he too tall to play it, or is he just a nice outlier because he technically is really strong? Like, can he hold up inside? I would be curious to see if they did that, how it would work. Let's talk a little Daniel Jones. I'm more just curious, like, how much you've kept up on kind of his recovery and when you expect him to play. Went down like week 9, so theoretically a 9-week recovery for an ACL would say he's ready. But with this Drew Lock situation, who do you think we see week 1?
I think it is going to be Daniel Jones. I think they came out and said that he's on track to be their starting quarterback week 1. Is the drop off from Daniel Jones to Drew Lock actually significant? I would probably want to see Drew Lock more than Daniel Jones, just because I know what Daniel Jones is at this point, and I kind of like the toolsy guys better. If you have two bad quarterbacks, I'll take the one that actually can make a splash play every now and again. They're both inconsistent. I'll take the guy that can actually rip it down the field. So that's kind of where I would lean on things. Is Daniel Jones technically better? Yeah, probably. But I think Locke at least gives you a little bit more upside. I wasn't a huge fan of his coming out or anything, but he's got an arm. I mean, that's for sure. But either way, it's not great. But yeah, I think Daniel Jones is going to be the week 1 guy. How good is that? It's not great.
I'm seeing so much of you, like so much of me and you right now, where I'm like, as a fan, give me the upside. I don't really care if this is a 7-win team. If Drew Lock sucks, we get a high pick, we get a guy in the future. I do think a big difference is Daniel Jones, like running ability and how much Dable kind of taps into that.
For sure.
Definitely raises the floor of the offense in a way that we haven't really seen Drew Lock used so much as a runner. Gun to your head, is Daniel Jones this team's starting quarterback in 2025?
It's a tough question. I know they didn't we're trying to prepare for him not to be in 2024. It's tough because you look at the 2025 class and you say, well, it's significantly worse. We'll probably see a breakout or two, but there's no Caleb Williams or Drake May to really get excited about. And I mean, QB3 going into last year was even more exciting than QB1 arguably this year. Because you look at Quinn Ewers, can't really get super excited about even as a big Texas guy. Carson Beck is fine, but we'll see what he can actually do out of structure. It's not anything special. So I would say yes, because of the financial commitment that they've already shown to Daniel Jones. It's kind of like, to go back to baseball, like you mentioned with the Twins. It's kind of like an Albert Pujols type situation where you've paid a guy so much and you're like, well, he's got to play. Yeah. I know it doesn't work exactly like that with football, but I think with QB it could. They still have an out after year 3 in the contract. It's less dead money than it would be right now. So yeah, I think if you look at the $40 million a year price tag, it's not good, but we know it's just all about guaranteed money and what the contract's actually structured like. I would say they probably can afford to keep him through 2025 because there's just not going to be a better alternative, and then cut him loose after 2025 if he's still stagnant.
Yeah. I would also take a little bit of a positive spin on that too. Just if he can be what he was in 2022, come in healthy, O-line's a little better, finally has somebody to throw to with Malik Neighbors, this team could very realistically be a 7-win team. You're looking at the 8th overall pick, probably. Even if a quarterback or two does emerge, it's like, well, we're not really in range to get that guy. And then you're right back to like talking yourself into like, well, he played pretty well. We have a lot of other issues other than quarterback. That's a positive outlook for Daniel Jones, but how much of a positive outlook is that for the Giants and their
His
long-term
absolute
future?
best case scenario, absolute best case is Kirk Cousins. Now he isn't that, but that's his absolute. He's never going to be, like the top 10 guy. He's always going to be, maybe if he plays up to his absolute best, the fringe top 10 guy that the fan base loves, that everyone else is like, well, sometimes he's quite good. Other times, maybe not so much. And I'm not saying Daniel Jones to Kirk Cousins is a comp. I'm just saying in terms of like how the player is viewed within the scope of all quarterbacks. Right. Malik Neighbors is the absolute best receiver for the Giants. Daniel Jones can't push the ball down the field. He doesn't have to with Neighbors. Get it underneath. And then if Daniel Jones has, let's say, 3,800 yards passing, and 800 of those are Malik Neighbors after the catch, people are going to be like, wow, Daniel Jones is so good now. It's like, well, I don't know if that's the case, but can he be good enough? Yeah, if the rest of the team magically improves, yeah, maybe.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk a little defense here. One of the more fascinating players for me on that side of the ball is Kayvon Thibodeau, because his overall numbers were like fine. Did he have double-digit official sacks, or was it just the PFF sacks?
Yeah. I think he even had like 12 and a half, maybe.
Yeah. So, the hashtag casuals, 11 and a half. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty good on paper. But, you get through the tape and he doesn't really show up that much. And I was a huge Thibodeau guy coming out, and I have every reason to sit here and be like, he's going to be amazing next year. But I'm kind of curious what you're seeing in him, like just kind of where you're at with him with the scope of this team.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit it on the head. It's one of those guys where you really got to watch. And that's part of why, actual film study is so important, is because you can look at numbers, but not all sacks are created equal, right? And Thibodeau is not really the dominant game record that 11 and a half sacks would suggest, because that's upper echelon. You get to double digits, you're a dominant player. But if you go back and watch, I know different players, right? But I think they both had 11 and a half sacks. So Danico Autry, obviously very different player from Kayvon Thibodeau, but who has more impact on the game? It was Autry 100% if you watch. So it's like not all sacks are created equal. I know, again, not the same position on the defensive line, but Thibodeau is just not the consistent force that you'd want him to be, because what's more valuable to you, right? One sack in a game, that, of course, those usually forced punts. That's good. It kills a drive if you get a sack, usually. Or like 5 to 7 pressures in a game that force throwaways. But if you get blanked otherwise, I don't really care about the one sack. I know that's going to be a hot take to some people, but the 5 to 7 pressures has more impact on the game than just one pressure, one sack. And Thibodeau's kind of more of the, I'm not really going to pressure that often, but I will clean up, or maybe I'll win one rep a game, and that's the sack. So I think with Brian Burns, he has more opportunity to grow. We got to remember, this is a guy who's played 31 games in his career, right? He's going into his age 24 season. He doesn't have to be the game record right now. I know he's drafted in the top 10. We'd like him to be, but how many of those guys have we seen recently that come into the league and are completely dominant right away? It takes a little bit of time to get going in football.
Yeah. I was just pulling it up. Out of 120 eligible edge rushers, he was 101st in pass rush win rate. So it's just like the narrative that it was a lot of it. I just think that there's a narrative that Wink Martindale is like bad for edge rushers, and I just don't think that lines up with the numbers. I think he got a lot of schemed up pressures, a lot of like open blitz looks, a lot of sack looks that, weren't really him doing a whole lot. So just got to see that jump. Still think the sky's the limit for him. He's got all the traits, but I do wonder if there's just like a little something missing in terms of the lack of development there. But
I think it's still early, or at least I'm going to prove, or at least like, think that to myself. And this is, I mean, if you watch Mid Oregon, this guy is rushing out of a 4-eye like every time. So, you're changing techniques, and you got to, adapt and build with that. And how many true one-on-one opportunities did he have just with a 4-man rush to win? Like, not many. Giants probably had the highest blitz rate in the league, or just about. A lot of stunts and twists, and of course, linebackers scraping through. So I don't know. We'll see if he has more of a true set of one-on-one opportunities this year with Brian Burns coming in. I'm super excited about that. So I think Thibodeau will have more of a chance to be great this year, and he's really got to take a step up, to your point.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a really good point, because, I mean, I made the point about Wink manufacturing some of the pressure for him, but he's not getting all those one-on-one reps that you would in another system to get some of that development for such a young player. So definitely could help. All right, let's do a little superlatives challenge here. Just kind of going down the board, picking. Let's just start with team MVP for the New York Giants. Who's going to kind of contribute to the most wins for this team?
Gut instinct was Dexter Lawrence, just because he's a game wrecker on the interior. And I mean, Giants bias maybe weighing into it a bit. I do think he's probably the best interior defensive lineman in the league now, with, Aaron Donald retiring, and you could maybe make an argument for it last year as well. He's a true nose tackle that can actually pressure from the 0 spot over the center. I really think he is about the best defensive player in the league. I get Chris Jones is great, Quinnen Williams. I mean, we can talk about all these great players, even just on the interior, but Lawrence is at the top of the list. If he's not 1A, he's 1B or C. So it's kind of like, take your pick there. I would say he's the team MVP. If I had to pick one on the other side of the ball, Andrew Thomas is the best player for sure, but had some health issues. And then if you're talking about actually a most valuable player, it would be Daniel Jones if he's good. But, he's quarterback, but he's obviously far from the best player on the team.
So I wrote down, I agree with you, Dexter Lawrence, but I think Malik Neighbors could be this team's MVP. I really do.
An X factor.
Just because that's been something they've missed so much. You already mentioned some of the run after catch stuff that they're going to be able to tap into. He's just so dynamic. I really thought he was the best wide receiver prospect I've ever evaluated since I started this channel, not named Marvin Harrison.
Okay.
Yeah. Like, it was, those two were both at the top. So if he can be that sort of like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase level impact as a rookie, which I don't think is, I mean, it's going to be tough with, the quarterback situation the way it is, but I think there's a chance for him to be team MVP. What about most improved player for the offense?
In 2024, who I think takes a step up? I think Wan'Dale Robinson is going to be a name to watch. Kind of flashed last year. He's going to be, I would guess, still slot only going forward, but also that's, I expect Malik Neighbors to get some slot reps. So I think Wan'Dale is going to be a contributor. Jalen Hyatt is another name that jumps up. I'd love to I hope to God it's Evan Neal, but I would go with one of the receivers, maybe Wan'Dale, maybe Jalen Hyatt, maybe Hyatt I would lean towards, actually.
Okay. Yeah. I can't go Neal with what I saw. I agree, though. I hope. I did get a good laugh that looking at the depth chart, Brian Dable just couldn't help himself but bring Isaiah McKenzie back to this team.
Yeah, saw that.
So I think he might eat into Wan'Dale's snaps a little bit as well.
But also, like, Paris Campbell, I thought was going to be something like that. He didn't even play at all. Right. So who knows? But yeah, Isaiah McKenzie with the Dayball connection certainly could be something.
Mine was John Michael Schmitz for most improved. I'm definitely not ready to give up on him. He was so good as a rookie, or as a prospect. And then next we've got most improved defensive player. Who you got there?
I mean, I think I could just go Kayvon Thibodeau and say, look to all we just talked about. I think Thibodeau's got to take a step up. And if you look at everybody else, I mean, what even are my options? Micah McFadden kind of flashed last year. I like him, but I don't know if he's going to take a huge step up. Jason Pinnock. Yeah, I would probably go Kayvon Thibodeau.
Yeah, that's probably the safest bet. I think Deonte Banks could definitely show up this year with an improved pass rush in front of him. Bringing in Brian Burns, a lot of opportunities. So, yeah, I mean, they've got the young talent with some of those premium positions. It's probably an easier pick there. But maybe not so much with this one. Who's the unsung hero of this team? Guy that gets no praise, but all the fans know that he's an essential part of the team.
It's tough to it's tough to talk about one of those on the Giants because of how bad they are. My gut instinct probably would have been Graham Gano 2 years ago, not after last year. And then with all the punting they do, how can you not pick the Scottish Hammer, Jamie Gillan? I mean, it might have to be a special teamer. I swear. I mean, this team is I honestly, I mean, maybe Raheem Nunez-Roche is Nacho as just a run stopper going forward. I don't know. I mean, it's really like, I'm looking at the depth chart here. It's a rough group, and there's been a lot of turnover as well.
Right.
So that's a tough
one
question.
Guy I was thinking of was a new body is Devin Singletary. I think can be this team's unsung hero because unless Tyrone Tracy,
he's like a running back, people are going to know about him as well.
That's true. Well, what about in kind of a way, Andrew Thomas, like in the sense of like he could be one of the 3 best, like an all-pro type of left tackle that, some spots might give him praise for that. Some spots might not, but just in the sense of how bad this offensive line was last year, if he can have an elite season,
stay healthy. I guess nobody really cares about offensive linemen for the most part, like in the mainstream. So I guess to some point, but it's tough for me to pick him just because he is, to your point, one of the best, 3 or 4 left tackles in the league pretty comfortably. So I don't know.
Okay. All right. We are going to just wrap this thing up with your kind of overall win total expectations. Vegas has them at 6.5. I think I know your answer. Over or under?
You think you know my answer? Really?
I think I do. Yeah.
I mean, I'm like the complete pessimist with this team every year. I hate watching them. I get no joy. I'll tell you what, I didn't get to talk about Tyrone Tracy, but that's the one player I'm excited about this year.
Okay.
He's going to carry the Giants to exactly 7 wins. I'm gonna actually take the over.
You are okay.
I'm gonna do the opposite of what my brain is telling me, and I'm going to say that they're going to bounce back this year. Brian Burns, Malik Neighbors, Darren Waller's retirement. That's all it takes.
Team not torn to shred with injuries, hopefully.
Yep.
Yeah. I like it. I think I still got to look at the schedule and all that, but I think I like it. I mean, they won 6 games last year in a nightmare season. I still got faith in Daboll. So cool. Glad to hear you end on a hint of optimism. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on. Anything else you want to say before we get out of here?
Yeah.
Any more Tyrone Tracy love?
Skip the Twins series this week.
I was telling you, I booked a flight out of town on Thursday, out of the country on Thursday because of how bad the Yankees are going to beat us. But thanks for coming on, and we'll see you guys later. Peace out. So I hope you guys enjoyed the interview. Thank you again for watching. Please do hit that like button on the way out if you have not yet. Really helps me out. Obviously, go subscribe to Bengal's channel if you're not already. Drop your comments down below what you think. And I'm out of here. I'm in Europe when you're watching this, so you won't be hearing from me for a couple weeks. Come back refreshed and actually heading into a new tier of teams for this series. So the timing really worked out. But until then, peace out.